increasingly important for ensuring human and ecosystem health. This panel will explore the ramifications of the digital revolution in terms of water quality, monitoring for system improvement, and policy making. Please welcome our moderator, Wenjin Zhang, a PhD student from Northeastern. Also, keep in mind that as in previous panels, the Q&A function will be active throughout the session. So please feel free to post your questions through the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom webinar window. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wenjin. I'm currently a PhD student in Northeastern University. I am so honored to be the moderator for the data panel in Water Summit this year. My PhD dissertation focused on building machine learning algorithms to achieve real-time water treatment monitoring and process control. So it's very data-intensive research. I'm really happy that we have panelists that have experience across a variety of different regions across this world joining us today. They will share with us their insights regarding water quality. So now we will have our panelists to introduce themselves. How about we go alphabetically? Robert, you are the first on my list.
Thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good to meet you. And looking forward to this panel discussion. So my name's Robert Bain. I'm part of the WHO-UNICEF Joint Monitoring Programme, which is the UN body that's responsible for monitoring 2 of the SDG targets, and specifically including SDG 6.1, which includes water quality. And I think that's very exciting and very different to how monitoring was done at global level just 5 years ago during the Millennium Development Goals. So, collecting new information on water quality, particularly around fecal contamination of drinking water, but also arsenic and fluoride has been a major focus of our work for the last few years. I'll be happy to speak to that. And I also have a link to MIT. So I studied with the D-Lab team, and that's really what got me kind of fixated, I should say, on the idea of finding easier ways of assessing water quality.
And DJ, how about you?
Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Donald Brooks. I'm Chief Executive Officer for an American NGO called Initiative O. Our mission is to strengthen water sanitation and hygiene capacity in developing areas and crisis zones. And concurrently, I also wear a second hat as a strategy and policy consultant with a global firm called Dahlberg Advisors, specializing in public health emergency management. So Initiative O, one of our specialties is water quality. Like Robert, have a loose connection with MIT and the development lab in Susan Murcott, looking at low cost solutions for monitoring water quality, specifically looking at, again, fecal contamination, arsenic, and other priority contaminants. But with Initiative O, we've more or less tried to take a more supportive approach and supporting municipal governments, local governments, to incorporate water quality decision making into planning processes, especially so the 2 countries in which we work principally now, Burkina Faso and Nigeria and West Africa. The focus is very much on the large mega cities, the 2 largest in Burkina, for instance, and many small and medium-sized cities also experiencing wash issues have received less attention and less support. And so we have been operating in this space, looking at satellite cities and smaller cities and how data, specifically water quality data, can be used to inform development and make sure that hard to reach or currently unreached populations within these cities are able to benefit from drinking water access. But happy to discuss more over the course of the panel.
Thank you. Luis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me be part of this panel. My name is Luis Montestruque. I am the Vice President of Digital Solutions at Xylem. Our company's tag phrase is "Let's solve water," and we live by this. Xylem produces under a number of different brands hundreds of products to move monitor, treat, analyze water systems in more than 130 countries. In my role, I am responsible for the development of data analytics platforms for managing the urban water cycle. These platforms combine Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and optimization algorithms to help manage the systems. The one question that I wake up every day to is, how can we utilize these technologies to help people that depend on safe, affordable, resilient water services and the environment? If we consider the places where these people live, if we consider the environment sort of the envelope around these people, how can we help the people and the environment in a more sustainable fashion? Climate change, population changes, aging infrastructure, rapidly growing cities, affordability issues present a lot of challenges for water systems. And there is a huge opportunity to leverage the already low cost and even ever decreasing cost of these technologies to help exploit the data for the benefit of the people and the environment.
Thank you. And Charlene. Charlene, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Yeah, so yeah, okay, great. So hi everyone, I'm Charlene, and I was a MIT grad student in the course 1 and technology and policy. And so right now I'm the founder and currently running my nonprofit in China called My H2O. And we are a nonprofit organization that's focusing on rural drinking water issues. And basically how we operate is that every holiday breaks, we send student teams that are on holidays into rural communities that have water quality concerns or issues with their current water infrastructure. So that these students who have expertise in water knowledge would help the community better understand their water and take their water quality data for them and help introduce them to the idea about like safe drinking water and carry out kind of courses and classrooms in these rural communities. And then among these like wide scale crowd-based volunteer fieldwork, we would kind of also identify villages where problems are at, and then we help them to match with our partners that are potential donors or resources or technologies that are willing to go into these rural communities to help them solve the issues at hand. So basically, we are trying to build this platform that are motivating young volunteers to go into rural communities and help them understand the water issues, and then we display that information onto our platform so that they can be more effectively matched with donors and solution providers that are interested in helping these communities solve their issues at hand. So that's what we are. We're basically a crowd-based information platform, but more like kind of the within the volunteer sector. So in the areas where we work, it's like kind of complementary to where the government's collecting data in more of the centralized system and making decisions based on like these water treatment plans and how they're running and all of that. We are more looking at the more decentralized system, like wells, water, like household, like water wells or water cellars and locations like that. So we kind of look at more of these remote areas where centralized data or data from the top-down collection is scarce. So we kind of empower the student network, volunteer network to help fill in those data gaps so that more decisions can be made and more resources can kind of come out to reach these more or less invisible population whose data are not really on the map. So that's kind of the work we do. And I'm happy to share more about sort of what we do in this specific sector and how the data can help more sort of complement the existing governmental data. Yeah.
Sounds really interesting. And Gary.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here. I'm Gary Wong with OSIsoft, and I lead our global water business. What we do at OSIsoft is we are in the real-time operational intelligence business. We were founded in 1980. We have thousands of customers around the world, anywhere from sectors like oil and gas to mining and utilities. So just in the utilities space alone, we have over 1,000 utilities around the world using our Pi system. So I head up the global water business for OSIsoft. And what we're here to do is really be able to, in real time, collect the data, help utilities and industrial customers manage that data and make more sense of it. Provide context around it, be able to aggregate the data, do analytics, and at the end of the day, really drive smarter decisions based on the data. And I think that's really important because, I remember starting my career many years ago as a control systems engineer. So we put in a lot of automation and sensors and so forth. So my question really is, why aren't we doing more with the data that we have? A lot of times we have questions, or we hear people saying, we have too much data. Well, we don't think that's true. You can never have, I think, too much data. It's being able to manage that data and having context around that, which allows people to make sense of that, transform it into information to drive that smarter decision. So around water quality today, specifically, we're seeing a lot more sensors, low-cost sensors that we're hearing, so that you can start to look at water quality in real time as opposed to going to the lab, for example. So we'll be really looking forward to discuss that further today. Thank you.
Thank you. So in this panel, we will discuss what is water quality data in different regions, why it's so critical to have accurate water quality data, both in developed and developing countries. So I did my homework in advance by Googling the definition of water quality data. It was defined, well, in general, the condition of water, including chemical, physical, and biological characteristics. So apparently it's a really huge topic and can mean differently for different purposes. I would like to invite our panelists to discuss the first question. What is water quality data? So DJ, apparently you worked on a lot of projects in Africa. Can you talk a little bit more about it? What is the water quality monitoring on the ground you worked on?
Definitely. So for us, I would say, so as an organization, because water, obviously, we're familiar, touches every part of life. And so there's interfaces between water and the environment, with education, women, etc. And for us, the interface of interest and of our action has always been between water and health. And so we very much take water quality to mean measures of the likelihood that water will cause waterborne disease, or the likelihood that it will cause illness in someone who drinks it. So for us, very much from a public health standpoint, these looks at, like Robert had mentioned, fecal contamination is a large one in the context of Africa, specifically in the countries where we work in West Africa. But it can be a wide range, including arsenic, which also has public health implications, nitrates and nitrites, and others. And so for us, it's very much this concrete link between health and water. Please stop me if I'm taking too much time.
No. So how did you collect this data? That's what I'm interested in.
Definitely. So we use a number of different technologies at the same time. And so most of our, so if we take Burkina Faso, for an instance, a country in West Africa, just north of Ghana, most, if not all, private water quality analysis labs are localized in the capital. And so we were working principally outside of the capital, which means that, it's not practical nor cost effective to send samples from, places where we're working to the capital to these labs. And so we were looking at more decentralized technologies that could also be shared with the municipalities in which we're working. And so one of the technologies we use is something that Susan Morkop's team has developed called the EC Test Kit, which combines 2 water quality tests for E. coli and total coliforms, which allows the tester to situate water quality into WHO risk categories, or likelihood of disease from drinking water. And so this is the main kind of bacterial metric that we use, but then we also have added another 5 key parameters for us, which are easily measurable using pretty low cost tools. Things like temperature, pH, conductivity, which are more or less just indicators of overall quality, and can raise red flags as necessary, indicating when it's required to do a more deeper dive into what's actually happening. Why is this not in line? And then we also test for arsenic. And so these are more or less, you can do all of these tests with small portable machines that can be, and you can create a lab really anywhere. So we have set up a lab in our West Africa regional office in the east of Burkina Faso. But this could be a room in a municipal building, kind of even a closet as necessary. A lot of these tests can be done anywhere and even in the field as necessary.
So Gary, I know you worked with both private and public sectors. Can you talk about how this water quality data being collected recently, and how's the difference between these two sectors?
Sure, I think it really comes down to, in terms of water quality, having the necessary sensors available, or like, DJ just mentioned, that having kits or test kits that you can have a portable lab. So I'm very fortunate to also be the chairman for Smart Water Networks Forum, SWAN Americas. And through that, it's all about, digital technologies to make our world around water, wastewater better. And we're seeing a lot of great technologies come about. I can think of one company called Ketos, for example, where they have real-time water quality sensors. So they measure over 20 parameters in real time, so you actually don't need a lab. So for example, at a typical utility, for compliance reporting and all that, you're going to actually have to take grab samples out in the field, whether it's the drinking water quality or the effluent coming out of a wastewater treatment plant. And then, those grab samples go to a lab, which takes, 24 hours or a few days to get the results. So now with this type of technology, we see, we can get instantaneous results from, 20 different parameters, from heavy metals to pH, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, and so forth. The other aspect we see now, I can think of, is, again, it comes back down to the sensors. One of our customers, for example, city of Salem in Oregon, they put these pontoons out in Detroit Lake where they get most of their water, and they're there to detect harmful algae blooms. And that's becoming more of an issue around the world as the climate's changing and the temperature of the water is rising. And they actually use that data with some neural networks, working with the prediction lab at Oregon State University. And they have very accurate forecasts 2 weeks out into advance that can actually predict if they're going to have a harmful algae bloom, and 2, if cyanotoxins are going to be created. So I think it really comes back down to having the sensors available, which is really important. And then, of course, having the necessary infrastructure to collect that data and then to bring it back into a central repository, say, to be able to manipulate and analyze that data and then present that out.
So I remember you also mentioned this algae bloom can also impact drinking water. How does it impact drinking water?
Yeah, with some of these algae blooms, they can be harmful in the sense that they create cyanotoxins. And those cyanotoxins, if we ingest it, or if our pets, ingest it, for example, we can get sick from it. So we're starting to see this throughout the world more and more. I know in the case of in Oregon, they saw this back as early as 2016. And the concern really for them was some of these cyanotoxins made it into their drinking water supply, because in a typical water utility, you don't have the necessary screening capabilities or the microfiltration needed to filter out some of these cyanotoxins. So, the whole aspect around the Oregon was to forewarn people, so for example, they don't go swimming, and for them to know if there are going to be algae blooms, and then if there were, they can see this coming and look for ways to address those HABs before they occur.
Well, so Robert, I know you also worked with data collection in different countries. Can you share with us more about your project? What does the water quality data mean to you?
Sure. Yeah, and I think as you're saying, it means different things to different people. And so for the joint monitoring program, what we've been doing is trying to address data gaps at national level. So in some countries, this is part of the regular surveillance. So, for example, in Colombia, there's this very in-depth data system called CiviCap, which collects information on a whole range of parameters, and that we would go in and we would extract the information on E. coli, arsenic, and fluoride. And then I think there's those are the administrative systems which are available for a large number of countries. In the US, for example, it's through the Safe Drinking Water Act, and any violations are reported. So you can get information at quite low geographic scales for the US on water quality, and again for a large number of parameters. The challenge there is that you don't necessarily know how many tests have been done. So it's a slightly different way of collecting the information compared to, say, Colombia. And I think a large bit of our work has been obviously hoovering up this national data and then including it in country estimates, which are then shared with countries for consultation, and to make sure that we're reflecting that information and to try and to address these data gaps and eventually to understand what the trends are for safely managed drinking water, which is the SDG indicator. We've also been supporting a large number of countries to collect water quality data almost as a baseline for the SDGs through household surveys. So those include the UNICEF-supported multiple indicator cluster surveys, but also others such as the demographic and health surveys. And there's a very large number of countries that do those typically every 3 to 4 years to get a sense of where the country is headed, and for a whole range of demographic and health indicators, particularly related to women and children. And I think the big bit of our work has been supporting countries to include water quality testing in those surveys. So you're training up people who are going out to interview households who've never done water quality testing before, and you get into all these very interesting discussions about where should you take the sample? Should it be the glass of water before people are drinking it? Should it be from the water supply? If so, at which point in the water supply should you be taking that sample of water? And it always involves the regulator who usually is involved in the training of those field teams. So there's opportunities for those discussions. But that data then feeds into the national planning progress, and also looking at inequalities in drinking water. And some of the results are really alarming. You have countries where these surveys are demonstrating 90% of the population of drinking water that's got at least one E. coli in. Some countries like Nigeria, where it's at least half the population have what we would consider very high risk. So I think it's interesting to see what happens after you've collected this data, and to think about what can governments do, what are the tools in their toolbox to address water quality issues. But I think one of the things that's very different for us is we tend to focus a lot on point sources, so and surveillance of a large number of water sources, whereas I think a lot of the very interesting work on real-time monitoring and inline operational monitoring is much more focused on utilities, and in some ways, adapting those tools so that they can be used as part of surveillance is a big challenge. And even in the US, the private suppliers, so people who've got a well in rural areas, those are often not subject to the same level of regulation and surveillance as the former utilities. So that's a big challenge.
It is a challenge. So, Louise, you worked with smart water system. How did this smart system perform data collection, and how did the system detect these problems in the data?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I was listening. There's a couple of items here that I wanted to highlight to start answering the question. One of them was Rob's and DJ's focus on just the level of interconnection that water has throughout society, right? We talked about the economic impact. We talked about social impact, focus on women and children in Colombia. We talked about health issues. And I think it is very important that we recognize how important water quality and access to safe drinking water is, and just in general, water services are throughout all of these places where parameters that vary in the parts per million or parts per billion can have pretty significant impacts in any of these aspects. Also heard from Gary about the availability of sensors now that helps us understand what is happening. We also heard from Rob and DJ a little bit about what we call the citizen scientist approach of enabling people to be able to collect data, right? So data is coming from a number of different sources. Sensors that are online, Xylem makes a large number of water quality sensors. We're getting data from remote satellites that are telling us where harmful algae bloom, for example, are forming. We're getting information from, for example, in the US from 311 calls that are telling us what the water quality is and are informing our systems. But collecting the data is just one part of it. What do we do with that data later on to action it is really the next step on the evolution. How do we, like Gary pointed out, how do we go from data rich to the next step of being information rich and enabling decision policy making? In my case, I am very much focused on 3 action items that stem out of water quality information, not only water quality, but actually water quantity as well. How do we maintain these systems operating? How do we make sure that these water systems are both delivering safe drinking water and removing wastewater in a safe way? How do we operate those systems in the most sustainable way? And finally, how do we plan the systems and evolving, extending them to areas that require better service or that don't have service? How do we maintain aging infrastructure? So and the difficulty here is that when we are looking at water systems, we are looking at a network. Really, it's a cycle of water where everything is interconnected. So as an example, for the harmful algae bloom, we have water qualities that start many cases in non-point sources like agricultural operations, where fertilizer runoff ends up washing into lakes or rivers and creating the kind of environment that leads to those HABs happening. And so how do we create systems that enable us to start, for example, addressing this from that point? Well, we do that by collecting information about where are the areas that are more danger of having those kind of events, and then installing the kind of systems that dynamically can help us, for example, through the use of digital twin technology to model how these HABs can form, or where is it that we have plumes of contaminants, which can be anything from bacterial contamination to chemical contamination. How do we track these plumes in such a way that we're not just observing them evolve, but we are actually actively maintaining the systems that are going to prevent them from happening, that we're going to operate them in a way that we minimize or eliminate the impact? And then how do we plan the future in which those problems get to be eliminated? So I am keenly interested on solving all of these problems in a much more comprehensive manner. And what encourages me that this is a world where we can actually do this in a comprehensive, holistic way is that the costs for sensors, the costs for computing, the cost for transmitting information through satellite images, through Internet of Things devices, the cost of enabling people to go out and empowering them to monitor these systems, the cost to compute what are the possible scenarios and predict what will happen. They're all going down and they're more globally accessible as time goes by. So the framework that we have thought of is that of a decision support system. We call it decision intelligence. Is a framework that enables us to monitor, predict, and then enable action and decision making over our water systems to be able to help us do that. I think that when we start looking at each of these different problems that we have, we find connections between them. And what we are occupied in doing is in expanding and connecting the dots between all of these different aspects.
So you also mentioned you are working on some project that using sensors and data to track water quality across the water distribution system to balance energy consumption with water quality. I'm so interested in how to balance energy consumption with water quality.
Yeah, so like DJ mentioned, there's a number of different connections here between different aspects that revolve around things. One of them is between energy and water. Energy and water quality, it turns out, are deeply connected to each other. And we start at the treatment plant, right? So we're drawing water. Where is it that we need to draw water so that we have good drinking water quality at the tap? Where do we draw the water and at what time do we draw the water is very important. How much treatment needs to go into that water to be able to make it drinkable is extremely important. So starting there, we have optimization algorithms and systems that help us design what is the combination of place and time where we're drawing water from these sources to ensure acceptable, safe drinking water. But it doesn't stop there, right? That's where it leaves the treatment plant. Then that water, which comes out of the plant with certain water quality, is going to traverse all of the drinking water network before it gets to businesses and residential houses. As it traverses this network, its water quality is going to be affected. And so there's a trade-off there too as well. Do we store the water in the middle of the night where the energy prices and the cost of energy is much lower and compromise water quality? Or are we pumping water, fresh water all the time throughout the entire day, including peak times, where the energy cost is greater and have improved water quality at the tap, right? So there's a balancing act. All of a sudden, we're presented with a trade-off that we need to make in order to, again, be able to provide safe water quality and then at the same time, be conscious of the amount of energy that it takes to move water throughout the city.
That's very interesting and challenging. So Charlene, you are trying to engage with the Chinese government on solutions for the communities where water quality problems exist. So how do you prioritize these problems or risks, if there are any? And also you are trying to involve the students. So that's very new to us.
Yeah, I think compared to, like, people have been talking about different types of data collection. Like one, you collect at the point of use, right? The other, you put like a sensor there and sort of collect it in the long, like continuously. And then it's other types. It's like you go there, you use the testing kit, and you sort of take a snapshot of data at that moment. And what we're doing is sort of that snapshot level of data taking, and we're also doing it through what people has already mentioned, like the citizen science type of sort of data collection. I think what differs is that compared to other folks who are talking about, oh, we're collecting all these data and making really high level decisions, I think for us, the decision at this moment is more on sort of a ground level. Like, for example, when our student teams go into these communities, what they've experienced is that water quality is something that's very intangible. Like when you talk about water quality, people don't understand. They're like, my water is pure, like it looks clean. Why are you talking about water quality issues? That's something sometimes it's not as directly understandable to the communities that we work with. And even sometimes they encounter potential diseases. They don't know if it's caused by water or something else. It's like, it's not that well connected, especially in rural China, where people generally still have the habits of boiling their water. So it's not like in other developing communities where they'll have diarrhea immediately and they know it's related to water. In China, that's less likely to happen because boiling water is sort of just a habit that most Chinese citizens have. So in that sense, the potential risks to their health is more long-term. So it's something that's not immediately obvious to them, not obvious to the rural villagers, not obvious to city folks, these students that are going in these communities as well. So when they actually go in and test for their water, they see like the colorimetric changes that are happening with their test kits. They like incubate the water so that like E. coli forms on sort of the petri dish or things like that. They really see that things are in the water, and these colorimetric changes are showcasing what's happening with the water. And that's sort of the process that makes these villagers understand like what I'm doing, like the fertilizer I'm using, the pesticides that I'm putting, like overloading is actually harming the water. So it's actually on some level, it's sort of a learning tool that helps people to understand like what's happening with my water and how my daily actions are actually impacting water. And it's also something that helps our students who may have never been into the rural communities before. They really understand like this is still an issue, even though everything looks clean, right? It's still an issue because compared to air quality, which has been a huger issue in China recently, like water quality issues are just not as visible. So there's not enough attention paid to it compared to air quality issues. But when you actually make it visualizable in that way, it's these type of things that make people think about it more. And it's also this way that we sort of engage with the communities. You tell them like these issues are there, it's real, you know, you need to change your behaviors. And when there is a possible for like cleaner, safer drinking water technology, like are you willing to adopt it for better health, right? Because we're still going into many of these villagers who are unwilling to even pay for any type of pipe supply water systems. There are many of these villages that we go to, because right now China is pushing for centralized pipeline supply systems, but many of these villagers, even it's at their door, they won't connect to it because they don't want to pay their water bills, because they feel like, oh, like I've been drinking this water for my whole life, right? I'm not dead yet. Like, why do I want to connect to a central system, even if it's treated, even if it's chlorinated, even if it's clean? That sort of gap is still there. And then when you actually help them understand the risks with raw water and drinking directly from like still groundwater or even surface water sources, then they slowly start to understand and are willing to understand like, what are some ways that I really have to treat my water, and why is sort of this type of water like improved water better, why should I build my water away from my toilets and things like that really kind of makes sense to them. So it's through these data that you're actually able to shift the actions or the willingness to adopt technology on sort of more of a local level. And that's something that we use this data in that process. And even in engaging, not just engaging with the villagers and our students, even in engaging with the public. Last year, like during World Water Day, we published a post that's talking about how the different color metrics of the water testing corresponds to different colors of lipsticks, right? So we imagine, oh, this looks blue, and like blue is kind of corresponding to a certain brand of lipstick. This is yellow, it corresponds to which brand, and what does it mean in terms of water? And then when that post came out, it actually got a lot of like reshares, and it was actually able to contribute to our crowdsourcing campaign, because it sort of, again, it makes something like intangible and transparent into something that's related to our daily lives, right? Like people think about, oh, the color of like lipsticks, I test lipsticks on my hand and like, see all these shows, and what about if I test for the color of water? You test for that color instead of testing for the color of lipsticks. So you kind of relate that, make it more relatable in the way that you test for water and showcase that data, and then it attracts public attention, and then we get funding to build a water plant here, build a water station here. So that's also one of our tactics and the fundraising campaigns that we put out, is to help people understand these data better and make it more visualizable, make it more creative, and also more young people can engage in that process because they think it's not just something so scientific, it's actually something fun and cool to do, to kind of be engaged in that campaign, in that process. So that's kind of one of the ways that we're also using that data as more of a public education, community engagement tool, so that we can better work with the communities to help the solutions delivered. And that's and after that process, after we build that connection with the community, we also it doesn't just end there, right? We don't just say, oh, we found your problems and that's it. We also have our own pool of solution providers, like funders, donors, and people like that, so that they're ready to engage with communities once we have the proposals ready. So when we collect that data, we make that information available to our funders, and then we help connect solutions. So in that sense, when the villagers engage with us, they know there is a potential for solutions if they are on the priority list. So we're not just there to take the data away from them, to do our own research, to do all these high level things, but we're actually helping them to using that data to help them solve the issues on the ground. So that in that sense, many of these community organizations are more willing to engage with us. And in terms of how we prioritize what villages we engage with and where we deliver solutions, it's really based on whether we have enough of these community support. Because ultimately, to deliver a solution effectively, you'd have to have local engagement, because it's them who will be running it, operating it, collecting the money that's made from whatever device they're using, and then operating in the long run. So if we have good community support, if we have good connections with the local government, like the village level or the county level government, then it's more likely to be done. But even if there's a really strong water issue there, but if there's no interest from the local community, even after all these campaigns, to be involved in the process, it's really hard for us to force any sort of solution on them. So that's why we kind of use water quality as an engagement to make sure that there is support from the community when we deliver these solutions. And yeah, we've been working well with many communities who have sort of come forward. They're willing to run these solutions on their own, and they're really willing to make this work in collaboration with us. So that's kind of the way that we do this. We work with a lot of these on the ground communities and run a lot of the, deliver a lot of the solutions through them. And ultimately, we hope that eventually it can become like more of a self-supported process. They can learn how to test water on their own. They can go on our platforms. They can seek the solutions that they need. And all we do is provide them with the methodology to do it that way. So it's kind of they using data as a way to help them find their partners, which they weren't able to find before, to help them solve the problems at their hand. So right now we're still doing a lot of the work, but eventually we hope to step backwards more and more, so that many of these local communities, these students, can really do this on their own, and so that it can spread to a wider scope instead of us like really helping to navigate where these solutions should be. It's actually them using that data to mix and match and make sure solutions falls into the right place, that where it's needed the most. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing work. So I remember last time we had a very brief discussion. Robert, you mentioned what is considered bad quality water quality data. Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in some ways, the first thing from my perspective is no data, because it allows, particularly at the level that we tend to be focused on sort of national policy, work with governments, it allows people off the hook, right? If you don't have any information to demonstrate the quality of water. And, it can either be no data, or I think as Charlene's talking about, lack of knowledge of the data that exists. So undoubtedly there is a lot of data on water quality in China, but the extent to which that's been disseminated, I think the reason that there's this demand for crowdsourced data and that this approach is kind of kicking off is perhaps because those communities don't have access to information that they might otherwise have through either government or through the utilities. So I think, first and foremost, it's not having any information at all on which to base your decisions. I think there's also possibilities of data being collected either on parameters that are less important, particularly from a public health perspective, and using those in the absence of other information. So you might end up focusing on things which are perhaps less important. I mean, an interesting example in some of the discussions we've had is governments being very concerned about disinfection byproducts in a country where the majority of the population doesn't have any chlorine in their piped water. And so, it's balancing those risks and trying to understand, what is the most important thing. So not having data is difficult. Basing decisions on either outdated or perhaps the wrong information is also challenging. And I think one of the things that's difficult for us, and this links to the points that Charlene's been making about, the need for having information at community level to drive change, is at the moment, it's quite hard to bring in water quality testing at community level because it takes quite a while, and you usually need someone who's had a decent amount of training. So it's very challenging to do water safety planning, and I think there's a lot of interest in particularly on piggybacking and other community development projects. So open defecation is a huge sort of priority in a large number of countries, and there's this idea that you might be able to build on communities that have completely transformed their sanitation by coming in slightly later on with some messages about water quality. And I think it's particularly interesting when we think about the kinds of tests that Charlene's talking about, color changes, things that you can really you can see that there's a problem. And some of the sort of newer tests which might be coming out are more likely to give you a digital reading. And I think it's an interesting question about how you then kind of do the messaging around that, in order to provoke concerns where communities may not have been particularly worried about water quality before, where issues are identified. So yeah, I think bad data quality can be collected, and you want to be making sure that there are measures. So things like blank tests are very regularly used in laboratories to assess whether or not the information that's collected is reliable. Question then is, what do you do if your blank tests are not looking good? And I think that's a big challenge for crowdsourced information, is if you have a lot of people doing self-testing, to what extent can local government use that as a basis for their decision making? It'd be interesting to hear from Charlene if that's something that that they considered, or how they plan to sort of push a little bit and use the data to advocate for changes in the centralized network, which is growing at quite a remarkable rate in rural China.
So Gary, you also mentioned you use sensors to collect a large quantity of data. So we just received a question. What are some concerns around inaccurate water quality data? It's just very similar to the question I just raised. What mechanisms are in place to prevent that? Can you answer this question, Gary?
Right, that's a good question. So from the sensor side and the digital perspective of things, if you collect the data, whether it's good or bad, the original data that's collected is always going to be preserved. And then you have to do certain calibrations and testing to kind of identify if that data is bad. So knowing that the data is bad, let's assuming that we've flagged it, there has to be a process that goes about to recalibrate the sensors, ensure that the sensors aren't fouled, and that whole process needs to happen, because we hear the phrase a lot of times, garbage in, garbage out, right? And well, if you know that you have bad data, then that's like you're almost halfway there, because you flagged that you are aware that maybe some of the sensors are bad or not reading properly. So from that process, once you know that, you have to go through the steps to recalibrate, ensure those sensors are good, just find that root cause analysis, why you have bad readings. And then, there's a number of paths that can be taken from there to figure that out. But again, kind of like what Robert was saying, I think having no data is the worst case kind of scenario. And then you got to just kind of go from there. And there's ways to do that too, in terms of technology, as that data is streaming in, for example, real time in a lot of cases that we see, you can set business rules, parameters, boundaries to, kind of do a high level gross check of the data quality itself. And then you can detect those in real time as well.
So also you mentioned there's a need for water quality. Sorry to catch up this. There's a need for water quality data in the industry sectors, including food and beverage, oil and gas, and power and mining. Is this topic related to the industry wastewater treatment? Can you share with us more?
Yeah, so really, if you take a look at some of the industries, like we'll take a couple, like food and beverage. So absolutely, water quality is important for us to drink and to provide to everyone in the world. But at the same time, when a company like a beer company, for example, they need to ensure that the water quality is coming in is acceptable to their standards. And then also we're seeing a lot more recycled water as well, which is really important. So a lot of these food and beverage companies and so forth, pulp and paper companies, they need a lot of water in their process. So they do look at the water quality. They also recycle a lot of that water. So when that water becomes recycled and being reused within their process, they also need to ensure that the water quality meets a certain standard. And some are much more strict than others, for example, in pharmaceuticals. And at the same time, when you look at mining companies, they have effluent that they discharge. So in their wastewater treatment process, before the effluent goes back out in the world, they have to treat that. And in mining, they can use a lot of nasty chemicals, for example, arsenic and stuff like that. So they also need to check and make sure the water quality on the discharge on the effluent side meets all the compliance before it goes back out into the rivers or the waterways that are out there. So that's all important. So we really like to look at the entire water life cycle, and absolutely drinking water quality is absolutely critical, but also these industrials need water as an input or have wastewater as an output. So that needs to be addressed and looked at as well.
So I just received a reminder. We have this session until 11:15. It looks like we still have so many questions to talk about. I have a question since we have so many students here. So I would like to ask this question. It might be interesting for all these students. What kind of qualities do you think the future water engineers should have in terms of knowledge and skills? Luis, can you answer this question?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that when we are looking at the future of water management, we clearly see an intersection between several disciplines, right? So the world where we have a professionals that are just focused on one very narrow segment of engineering, for example, or policy making, it is one that is not useful anymore. We need to have people that come out of schools with a much broader view that crosses different disciplines. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about, for example, today, marries information technology, data collection with water resource management, right? So professionals that in the future are going to be the ones that are going to be moving forward the water sector are the ones that carry this multidisciplinary approach to solving these problems from themselves, right? And then the question is, how do we actually assemble teams that are able to solve these problems in a larger scale? And we need in those teams people that we not only need teams that are multidisciplinary by themselves, but we need the individuals themselves to be also multidisciplinary and literate on several aspects of water management, where those are biology, health, economics, social issues, and so on and so forth. So a more holistic approach to how we are educating the professionals of the future needs to be considered.
Great. So I'm going to grab another question. What are the largest gaps in the knowledge between academia and industry, and between industry and the government sectors? Charlene, can you answer this question?
Yeah, so are you talking about what the gap of information from and the government perspectives?
Yes,
or...
in the chain of communication and the knowledge.
Yeah, I think this is definitely something interesting, because this is a pattern that we see not necessarily from the industry's perspectives, but especially when, like, as everyone know, like China's government system, when it operates like these infrastructures, everything's very sort of top down, right? You want something implemented and it happens fast and it happens like in the same way everywhere. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time. So like one thing that we see right now is there's this like strong push to establish pipeline systems everywhere. Right, so the government has been pushing to say, okay, like every single household have to have like a piped water system, and every village needs to have like a wastewater treatment plant. So so when they push for it, they really push for the infrastructure to happen. It's almost similar to when India pushing for like the sanitation campaign. It's just pushing for toilets to happen. I don't care about the habits. I don't care about if they use it. I just want this like infrastructure to be there, so at least it looks good. Right, so that's kind of the thing that happens initially in these types of campaigns. So what we observe when we go into these rural communities is that even though sometimes the infrastructure is there, like people are not paying for them, no one's monitoring them, no one's using them, and sometimes if, for example, if you build like a water reservoir that's like supplying water to the community, but if you don't set up a routine to operate and manage it, then the water that's collected from there actually becomes more contaminated. There's like a high turbidity because no one's ever there to clean like the central water system that's built for this community to hold water. So you kind of see these gaps between what the government thinks is a centralized way to provide clean water between what's actually happening on the ground. Like how are these facilities managed? Like how are these systems adapted to each of these communities? It's not necessarily just the water quality data. It's actually you know, like how are people behaving around it? How are people's actions changing around it? And how's the operation and maintenance, like after the system has been built locally, how is that working out? And that's one of the really critical challenges that the government is now kind of facing, is between this gap between having the infrastructure and actually having people there to securely operate it and run it like on a sustainable basis. And that's sort of the gap that we're seeing when we go into many of these communities. And we also report that in that process, when we collect these data, we collect data about how each of these villages, they're operating differently. And some of these villages, they kind of have like a I would say self-gathered like group to operate these systems. They might work better, and sometimes they might not. So that's one of the work that we do as well. We set some of the research topics to the students, and then they collect that data, and we gather that data back at our end. So we kind of compile a report talking about where the best practices are at, which of these local villages are managing it better, and how can maybe the central government, when they're implementing new policies, how can that be done in a better way. So that's in another way that sort of these bottom-up data collection can support these top-down implementation of new policies or new infrastructures, is that these bottom-up information can help to improve or shift the directions in how some of these policies can be better implemented down the road. So that's kind of the gap we're seeing. And that's also a way that I see how citizen science or data in the crowdsourcing way can complement more of the mainstream data. Yeah.
I am so sorry, but we are running out of time. So there is a breakout session right after this panel, and we all got this Zoom link, right?
So I thank you for the very informative panel discussion. So we will go into a 10 to 12-minute break, and I will send a Zoom link for everyone. If you want to continue the conversations from this panel, then you can go into the Zoom break room and just continue to chat with our panelists. So let's thank our panelists and our moderator again. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It's very informative and very.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
The link is in the chat.